Hi, Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and in this video I'm going to address an email I got from a viewer quite a while ago, actually, but it actually kind of follows nicely on the video I recently did on Gandalf as a Machiavellian schemer, because in that video I mentioned how he could be accused of maybe waiting too long or allowing Frodo to wait too long to leave the Shire once he has, knowledge of the fact that it's the one ring that Frodo has and all this other stuff. And this email that I got was on this exact topic. The question was, why did Gandalf let him wait so long? And for reference, in the book, what happens is Gandalf comes back to Bag End in April with the news that, oh, by the way, Frodo, you're carrying the most powerful weapon in the entirety of Middle-earth, and we need to do something about it. And he ends up having a conversation with Frodo about leaving, and Frodo says, I think I'll, leave on my birthday, which he shares with Bilbo because it seems to him kind of a appropriate thing to do. Bilbo will later kind of criticize him for this and say that was kind of silly. But anyway, he's waiting, and Gandalf says, okay, but no later. And we get the sense from Gandalf that he is, and this is brought up in the email by the person who sent it to me, just called himself Nick. So I don't know if he remembers sending this email because it's so long ago, so I'll just remind him in case he's watching. But he points out the fact that, yes, Gandalf uses the excuse that you don't want to just up and leave in such a hurry that there's news about it. And he doesn't find this explanation really convincing for why he would wait so long. So let's take a look at the pros and cons of leaving early versus late, why Gandalf might have allowed such a delay, and see how this all turns out. Now, as I mentioned in my previous video, you can accuse Gandalf of being a little too slow here. But you will notice that when Gandalf tells him, okay, fine, he adds on the but no later. So even Gandalf does seem to think that waiting another 5 months is pushing it. So it's not like Gandalf is, just totally dragging his feet or willing to let Frodo totally drag his. He's like, yeah, we need to get going pretty soon. We can't just wait forever. And the idea that Frodo has is that will give him enough time to sell Bag End and then make a quiet move that will cause some stir, because everything's going to cause some stir, but not enough that everybody's going to be in a total uproar for all of time. And then once he gets to Crickhollow, he's going to just kind of quietly leave. And what the plan is for Fatty Bolger, although I don't think Frodo is completely in on this part of the plan, because this is really more the conspirators who are up to this, Merry, Pippin, and Fatty, and Sam to a lesser extent, although Sam, having been caught by Gandalf listening, is less part of the conspiracy than he was. Fatty Bolger is actually planning to take Frodo's place, dress in his clothes, and just act like Frodo is still living there. Frodo is not aware of this part of the plan, but his goal basically is to slip out and not really have anybody know that he's gone until much later. The idea being that way nobody knows where he's gone, why he's gone, or even when he left. The idea there is so that there is no general stir and general knowledge of information that could help anybody looking for him get an idea of, okay, well, here's how we follow Frodo. So that's the point, really, behind all this, is to leave Bag End in a way that leaves, a forwarding address that's not too far away, and then basically just vanish from there, because it's in a quiet corner of the Shire, and, well, technically may not be in the Shire, it's in Buckland, but, be able to vanish from there without really a trace. So that's the point in having the delay, is to be able to give him time to manage the transition to a place where he can leave in a very not public way. Now, Gandalf, as Nick admits, is not aware at the time that this decision is made that the Black Riders are out, but he says, well, what about other spies of Sauron? Surely Gandalf should have anticipated that somebody would be out looking. And what we know that Gandalf knows is that Sauron has learned from Gollum probably enough information to get Baggins and Shire. Now, unlike in the movie, and we have to remember this because it's kind of the same in the book, but not really. We know in the book that Gandalf knows that Gollum knows that Bilbo's name was Baggins and that he came from the Shire. In the movie, we get Gandalf being an omniscient third-party narrator, apparently, who somehow knows that Sauron got Shire and Baggins out of Gollum through torture. He doesn't know this in the book. He just knows that Gollum knows those names because Bilbo told the story to Gandalf, and therefore he knows that Bilbo told him this information, and therefore Gollum has this information which could be revealed through torture or other means to Sauron. But he doesn't know for sure that Gollum has revealed this, although it's a pretty safe bet that he did. So he knows that he's been captured by Sauron and interrogated almost certainly, but it's not like he knows for sure what was revealed. And even if you reveal Shire and Baggins, how far does that get you? The Shire is not really known widely. And Gandalf would be the one to know this, because Gandalf is the one who knows the Shire the best of most outsiders, and travels all over the place. Who knows about the Shire exactly? Breelanders know about the Shire, but that's a long way from Mordor. You'd have to get some spies really far out to do that. And it's not like Sauron just has a bunch of normal-looking folk who can send out and be completely inconspicuous and find out information. We do get, of course, some of the people who come from, Dunland and whatever that end up in Bree that look different than the locals. We get that reference, and we assume that they're spies. And you've got Bill Ferny, who kind of goes in league with that guy and the Black Riders, apparently. So there is danger, obviously, of Sauron getting information. But the thing is, the spies that might be in that kind of category would have a much harder time sending information back to Mordor in anything like a quick fashion, and they wouldn't be able to do much on their own. Because unlike the Black Riders, who inspired terror in everybody, any spies that would have been in that kind of position would be easily dealt with for the most part, and they would also not be able to just haul across Middle-earth all the way back to Mordor in a matter of, days or weeks, in very few weeks, in order to then get whatever expeditionary force Sauron wanted to send out after the ring. So even if there are spies, that's not the most dangerous thing. What makes the Black Riders dangerous is the fact that they can do what they want by force, because of the terror they inspire, and because of their number, and because they're carrying weapons too. And the fact that they can travel very quickly without really being stopped. That's part of what makes them so dangerous. So it's not like any old spy is just a huge problem. It's not quite the same thing. So that's, I think, part of the calculus that goes into this. And like I said, Gandalf knows pretty well that the Shire is not broadly known. Outside of Dale and Erebor and Rivendell, and Sauron ain't going to get a spy in Rivendell, that's for sure, and Bree and the area around Bree, virtually nobody knows about the Shire. And so how is Sauron going to get information? Sauron does send people up to the area of Erebor and Dale. Does he send spies up in that area? It would be kind of tough, because for one thing, he doesn't have dwarves in his service that he could send that would be, just in Erebor and be able to pick up information. He also does the direct ask approach because he thinks he can get... He also does the direct ask approach because he thinks he can get them to give up the information by either coercion, I'm going to destroy you if you don't, or bribery, I'll give you a dwarven ring if you do it. And so he kind of overplays his hand. Sauron makes a mistake probably in that way. And Dale, he kind of does the same thing. He also puts pressure on Brand, who is then the king of Dale. And the dwarves know this. They carry this information to Rivendell and relay the fact that, King Brand of Dale, he's under a lot of pressure right now, and we're not sure if he's going to stick, with us on this. But again, that's the direct coercion method. And Brand, even if Bard knew, and we don't know that Bard knew where the Shire was, he just knew that there was a hobbit who was traveling with, a bunch of dwarves, how much of that information would have filtered through to Brand? Like, I mean, really? It just doesn't seem likely that he would have any detailed knowledge. So there's actually very little in the way of opportunity for spies to learn anything, and it's in the Unfinished Tales Hunt for the Ring information that we get really the details of how the Black Riders even got as close as they did, and how they did that was from Saruman. And of course, at this stage, Gandalf is not suspecting Saruman as being a bad guy and in league with Sauron, or even not necessarily in league with, but willing to give up critical, information to save his own hide. That's not where Gandalf is at this point in the story when he leaves. When he does leave, it's because he meets up with Radagast the Brown, and then he is told the Nine are abroad, and Saruman says, "Come to me now so that we can, come up with a plan, but if you come too late, well, there's probably nothing we can do." So he immediately takes off, and as he will acknowledge in the Council of Rivendell, what he should have done is turned back, got Frodo, and hightailed it right then and there, because that would have been the smart thing to do. And, of course, that would have meant he would have had a good 3-month lead, probably, because I think that was pretty much in June, if I remember right. So that would have been the smart thing to do, which he realized, but he was also, he was getting a message from somebody he trusted, from somebody else that he mostly trusted. He tells in other places, like, his heart misgives him about some of the things that Saruman says and does. But he still thinks of Saruman as an ally. And so he's hoping that Saruman has a way to, defeat or at least counteract the Black Riders, which are the most dangerous, spies that Sauron could send out to hunt for the ring. So he goes there thinking that he's going to be able to forestall anything even further. What he doesn't realize is he's going to end up trapped in a tower. So it's this whole situation where the most dangerous thing he thinks he might be able to stop, and it turns out totally wrong, because Saruman is actually not on his side anymore. So the delay to September, as I mentioned, Gandalf is talking about this as, that's really about the limit of where we want to stretch this, Frodo, but okay. So he's already in the realm of, that's probably too much, but, if that's what it takes to get it done, fine. At least that way we don't leave any signposts for the bad guys when they come looking. And he doesn't expect anybody to find him. The Shire is not a thing that is just widely known, and the people who do know it are less likely to give it up than others. So the Breelanders, you might say, are a weak point, but again, that's an area where you wouldn't necessarily expect Sauron would even be able to find anytime soon. Not that he doesn't know Bree exists, but it's really distant, it's far out of the reach of his own power, and it takes a lot of time to get there. And he's going to be searching for stuff closer to home, let's say. And in the Hunt for the Ring material in the Unfinished Tales, we actually do learn, in one version at least of the story, that one of the suspicions Sauron has is that he will be able to find halfling settlements in the vales of the Anduin River, and they actually go and search there because they were known to have been there at some time, years and years and years and years before, and so that's kind of his starting point for looking. And that's the thing, so much of Sauron's information is out of date, because whereas he used to rule over wide swaths of land, he hasn't in a long time. Dol Guldur is still under his control, but it doesn't have a whole lot of reach, and everything else is kind of Mordor and eastward. So it's not like he's got, a whole lot of information just at his fingertips at this point. So taking all this into account, let me read just a little bit from Nick's email. He says, "Even if it would be very unlikely for Sauron to put it together, it seems odd to just say, well, the fate of the world is at stake if you get caught, but it's probably fine if you want to chill for half a year at your publicly available home address. Again, I know Sauron doesn't quite know anything yet, but he has enough info to look into it, Shire, Baggins, Anduin Valley, etc., which could very well eventually lead him to finding that home address. The idea that this would be impossible to do is obviously belied by the fact that that's exactly what happens. The Wraiths figure out where he is and just miss him at Bag End. But as I've shown here, yeah, they find Bag End, but it's only because the very opposite of what seems to be true is actually the case. It's because Saruman gives the information to the Ring Wraiths, which in Gandalf's mind is not even a possibility. There's no way it should have happened. And that's what I think gets missed a lot. And it's the other thing you have to remember, especially with the Lord of the Rings, even if we want to discount the Unfinished Tales material, you can't assume what people know and what they themselves assume. There's a lot going on that we just don't get in the story. Gandalf knows a ton of information that we don't have, right? We don't even know anything about Saruman until we get to the Council of Rivendell, and it's all happened already, right? So we know that Gandalf knows other wizards, and we know that there's like a council, and we know a few other things about Gandalf and his job, but it's really mostly a mystery, and so it's not clear to us as the reader reading The Lord of the Rings for the first time how much of this stuff is based on knowledge, how much of it is based on inference or surmise or assumption or whatever. We know very little about the calculus that's going on in Gandalf's brain because he doesn't divulge all of it. And so we kind of literally, in a sense, have to take it on faith that he knows what he's doing. And if he had been right, that Saruman was not a traitor, he would have also been right that Frodo had plenty of time and the Ring Wraiths never would have made it to Bag End. Also, the fact that he calls Bag End a publicly available address. I mean, it's publicly available within the Shire, but you have to find the Shire first. And the thing about that even is, a hobbit from the Shire gonna just tell a black-clad stranger from who knows where with some funny accent where Frodo Baggins lives? Now, the gaffer almost does this, but the gaffer is half blind and half deaf, and probably doesn't really know who he's talking to. But everybody else who runs into the Black Riders in the Shire is immediately suspicious, and hobbits are just kind of by default suspicious of outsiders anyway. So yeah, it's publicly available because the hobbits have a postal service, but is anybody actually going to tell the Black Riders where they can find something outside of being coerced through fear? And that's probably how they did it, ultimately. They probably figured out by terrorizing some hobbit who wouldn't give up the information willingly where they could find Bag End. But it's not like that's going to be the easiest thing to do. It's also, you also have to remember, the Shire is a lot bigger than we give credit for. Look at a Shire map sometime and find Hobbiton. And it's not at all obvious that most people in the Shire would actually know where Frodo lives. Just Hobbiton to Mickle Delving is a bit of a walk. It takes the hobbits days, multiple days, to walk across the Shire from Hobbiton to Buckland, and Hobbiton is relatively central. The Shire is a big place, so it's not like everybody in the Shire is even going to know where Frodo Baggins lives. There's many Bagginses, some Sackville Bagginses as well, and so it's not going to be obvious that an outsider with just the name Baggins is going to be able to get immediately to Bag End, because the Bag End is not like the ancestral home of the hobbits named Baggins either. That hole was built by Bilbo's grandfather or father, I forget which. It's not even that old of an address. So it's not like, Baskerville Hall or something where you can find all the Baskervilles going back for however long, past Sherlock Holmes or something like that. That's not the kind of thing we're dealing with. So yes, Gandalf probably should have been a little more in a hurry, but I think there is also some truth to the idea that you do want to delay a little bit in order to obscure the leaving. Now, this is another area where Nick kind of points out what he thinks is a flaw in this logic. And he says, paraphrasing here, I'm not reading directly from the email, he says something to the effect that, well, if somebody is close enough that they can get news of where Frodo went after he left, they're close enough to need to leave immediately. Here I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding, because actually it's true on the surface level that if somebody is close enough to finding something, that they're also close enough to find, not just the information about where you are, but where you've gone. But that doesn't necessarily work in reverse, because the news of you leaving is not necessarily the same thing as the news of where you are. And I've already talked about this some because of the whole plan to literally just kind of disappear out of the Shire. Frodo's plan is to leave the very public and much talked about Bag End and get out of there where he is under the microscope of a lot of Hobbit society, and go to Crickhollow, where he's going to be in a house that's kind of set apart from everybody else, very, independent, not connected to a lot of people, and live a quiet life, and then just whoosh, he's gone. Now, it is true then that if he had left Bag End as his, departure point and never stopped in Crickhollow, that he would have been able to, you would have the same problem either way, right? They figured out where Bag End was, and therefore they figured out where he went by luck, because the gaffer, gave away information that he probably shouldn't have, because he didn't know what he was doing, because he's blind and deaf. But he's got the added advantage, once he's in Crickhollow, of being able to leave again and not leave any kind of stir about, well, Frodo left and he went that direction, because nobody saw it. That's the point. And in fact, when we get the conversation with Frodo and Merry and Pippin and Fatty Bolger and Sam, Frodo tells them, I've made up my mind, I'm going to leave first thing tomorrow. So his original plan was to stick around for a little while before he realized he had people hunting him, and set up the idea that Frodo has just settled down in Crickhollow and everything's fine. And it's partially because the conspirators already had this plan in place to leave Fatty Bolger there with Frodo's clothes and act out as if Frodo was still living there, that this plan kind of gets saved. Because Frodo's plan was to be there for some period of time, probably not more than a week or two, but be public enough about his existence there that people would be like, oh, yep, there's Frodo. And then one day just, he's gone. And nobody knows how or why, because they only saw him like occasionally anyway, so it won't be missed for at least a few days, by which point the trail is cold. So Nick's problem with the logic, I think, misses this point, that Frodo's whole plan is to make it seem like he's there longer than he is, so that nobody notices he's gone, let alone which direction, when he left, any of that information. He could have gone north, south, east, west, nobody knows. Whereas if you leave from Bag End, that's, Hobbiton is very populous, it's very, densely crowded compared to Crickhollow, and it's just a lot harder to leave there secretly and not have somebody notice. So, yes, the timing makes a difference, actually. In this scenario, Frodo can leave, and because he's not being caught at the doorstep, he can leave and not even leave any signs of where he went, when he went, or any of that. So I think that's the part of this that Nick probably missed in his analysis, and it's the part of it that really saves the whole plan. Now again, you could argue that Gandalf was a little bit too slow here, and I think that's a fair argument. But I don't think that Gandalf was allowing him to wait that long because, he was just completely wrong about the whole danger of the situation. Gandalf's key miscalculation was Saruman's a traitor and is going to give information out that shouldn't have been available to Sauron spies for quite some time. If it hadn't been for that, I think Gandalf had pretty good grounds to believe that nobody would have discovered the Shire probably for a good while. And certainly not specifically where Bag End was. So I think that's really the two key points that make this work. And again, that's not to say that you can't say that Gandalf should have been a little more cautious anyway and just had him leave sooner. But I think in the realm of, if we're trying to make sense of the book, these are the ways that we kind of make that story fit the facts a little bit better. So I hope that is a satisfactory explanation. You can argue left and right all day on, which one you think makes more sense. But I think that at least these give more reason to understand why Gandalf was willing to wait. So if you find that at least a little more plausible, hopefully, I've managed to convince at least some people out there that it's not quite so bad as all that. So if you found the discussion at least interesting, please do give the video a thumbs up, share it around. If you want to catch my future content, make sure you subscribe on whatever platform you're watching. If that happens to be YouTube, click the bell icon. Make sure you don't miss any notifications. Follow me on the platform formerly known as Twitter for Tolkien-related trivia questions every week, and check out the other support and social links in the description below. Until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek, signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namarie. Thanks to all my channel supporters, especially elf friends Nathan Dufour, Robert Kindling, and Stephen Clayton.